Hello again and welcome back. As you can see, we're back with the old Chevelle once more. Got a few gremlins to try to iron out still. Got the new gauge cluster we're going to be installing. Hopefully take another test drive and not break down. So let's get to it. The new turn signal indicator housings have shown up. Over here on the driver's side, we really only had issues with our parking lamp not working. Other than that, it seemed like the turn signal indicator worked okay, but I just went ahead and picked up new housings for both sides. So these are the ones I got. They're from Goodmark. Seem to look exactly like the originals. It's nice that it does come with the actual mounting hardware. It's really annoying sometimes when you buy stuff like this and it doesn't come with screws. You got to just try to figure out what fits in there. So I find the easiest way to get these things out once they're on the car like this is to take the plastic housing off first. Then it's just the two screws there at the top. But then you got to try to jam it down kind of between the bumper brackets. So with that plastic lens on there, it's pretty much a nightmare trying to get these things out. Much easier to just take that lens off. So I'm going to go ahead and get this one out, get the new one installed, and we'll see if we've got both the parking light and the blinker on this side. On the passenger side, we didn't have either. There was definitely a short in the actual socket itself, so we'll see if that takes care of that side here as well. So over here on the driver's side, you can see that we have success. So I have the parking light on and I've got the turn signal indicator on, so you can see both levels of this light are working correctly now. Whereas before we were just getting the turn signal indicator. Now I did swap out the bulb for this. It came with a clear bulb as well. It was pretty bright, but for the most part people just, it doesn't register in their mind when they've got just a regular white light flashing at them that that's a turn signal indicator. Whereas a flashing amber light, it just seems to trigger immediately like, yeah, that's a turn signal. So I decided to run with the amber bulbs here. Pretty happy with the way this has turned out. Those new clear lenses on there make this actually look quite a bit more bright in person than it actually would probably is showing up here on the camera. So pretty happy with that. Gonna go ahead and tackle this whole passenger side one here, see if we get our parking light and our indicator working again over there, and if so, I'll be pretty happy with the way this has turned out. We've got that passenger side replaced here, and as you can see, we now have a working turn signal indicator. Let's go ahead now and try to test and see if our parking lamp works as well. Go and pull the light switch out here. Too far. And there we go. Got working parking lamps now and turn signal indicators, and the hazards seem to be working. They don't kind of blink exactly the way they should. Still got to switch out that turn signal indicator on the interior next. But I do believe all the issues and shorts up here with the lamps are all taken care of. So now we can move on to the interior and start dealing with that nightmare. Next, we need to get this steering wheel out of here. It's the wrong one for the car. I believe this is a 71, 72. It's not even an SS wheel. Not exactly sure why this is in here. Like if somebody swapped the entire column or if they just swapped the wheel. But in either sense, we need to get it out of the way because we want to get access to that turn signal indicator switch, which is behind all of this. So this center portion here should be just held on with two screws. That should give us access to the bolt here in the center. And then from there, we can start actually trying to get our switch out. But before I do any of this, one thing I like to do is I take the assembly, the new one, just separate like this, and I connect it up, as you can see down there. I just pulled the old one out, plug this new one in, and I like to go through and test all the operation with this thing just to make sure that it is actually going to fix the issues that we think we're trying to fix. So this little guy here controls both your horn, which is controlled by this little button here being grounded out. It's got your hazards, which is this little black section here. The hazard control screws in here and then it pushes upwards like that to engage. And now we can hear our hazards blinking away. We kind of pop that back down. And then you can move this big top piece here either direction to actually engage the turn signals. So I've gone through and verified all of this. It does seem to fix all my issues. My hazards now work beautifully with this. The turn signals engage and work absolutely correctly. They all flash at the correct time, so I don't have a problem with the flash or anything else. So getting this thing in here is going to fix a whole bunch of my issues. That means I've got to get the steering wheel out of the way first. I'm going to go ahead and start taking this apart. So we've got just a little bit of redneck hackery going on here. I couldn't find my regular steering wheel puller, so I kind of just rigged something up with this kind of generic ball joint style here. As you can see, I got two nuts installed there that fit into the threaded holes where the puller would normally go. And then I just kind of grabbed this ball joint puller here and put it on the outside of those washers there and used that to pull the steering wheel off. And you know, the old saying is, it's not stupid if it works, and well, it worked. Okay, so our struggles don't stop there. So once we get that out of the way, we come into this little plate here, which is just held on by 3 screws. We pop this out of the way. We've got this additional plate here as well, and this one's a little bit of a chore to try to get out. It's held on by this little snap ring here in the back. What you want to do is generally apply pressure, pushing this downwards here, and they make a special tool for that. Then you can kind of get in there and work on that ring and try to prop that ring out. So once we've got that spring clip removed here, the locking plate should just kind of pop free. And I discovered that's what this is for. This is what provides your steering lock when you've got the ignition key turned to the lock position. So this out of the way here, you can see there's this detent right here that's connected to the ignition switch. Right now it's in lock, so this detent is pushed out all the way back. It is spring loaded here. So the way that this should work here is that it should come up in between these little teeth that are cut in here and then lock the steering wheel from being turned. Now if you have it in a position where it's being covered because it's spring loaded, it'll just kind of stay depressed until you find one of those open slots. Then the spring pressure just pushes that detent out and it just locks it into place. And then once we turn the ignition key here, you'll see that it gets sucked forward. As you can see, it is sucked very far forward there. And that's what allows this then to rotate freely without getting locked up. Then once you put it back into lock, you can see there that it just springs all the way back out. So next up, we've got our little horn ring here. This is a little piece of plastic that's pretty fragile. And on the back of it, it's got this brass track right here. It's really important to get this nice and clean because this provides continuity through this track to that little brass button right there, which is kind of dirty. If we compare it to the new one there, it's much cleaner, as you can tell. And the way that this works is when this is on here, it's kind of spring loaded and pressed against that little button in the back. As this turns, it provides 360 degrees of electrical continuity for your horn. And the way that the horn should work is that there should be an additional component that goes on the top part of the steering wheel here that grounds to the kind of the base of the steering wheel, which is bolted up to the shaft here, which is kind of just grounded out. And then from there, when you press that, it provides, or it completes the circuit from here through some missing hardware that should go down through this little long tube right there to that brass track on the back, through that little brass button there, through the wiring harness and connector, and then back out to your horn relay. And that's how your horn works. Clearly, we're missing some hardware there, but moving on. Next up, it's always a good idea to compare your assemblies here and just make sure that they look like they're the same. Just check all the mounting points, make sure that they all look like they would line up correctly. Also, you want to check where the lever bolts on, over there on the top. Compare that on this new one here to make sure that's in the same location as well. Everything looks good. It all looks the exact same here. There's a little bit of difference between some of the wire colors there at the top that I can see, but the pinouts should all be the same. I kind of expected that to be different. So next I'm going to go ahead, get this ready, pull this out. I'm going to tie a guide wire up to the harness before I pull it through here. That way I've got something I can tie the new one to when I pull it back through. It'll just be easier having something to kind of pull on the bottom instead of trying to have to just shove it down from the top, because it's going to get bound up quite a bit trying to get it through this column here. And if you're wondering, this is an American Auto Wire replacement here. This is what they call their original style replacement, where it's just got the long harness in one connector. They offer a couple of others that are replicas of some of the GM service parts that they made available, which were kind of a universal fit where they ended up having a different style connector in the middle. And then there was another shorter service harness that you'd connect that to go back to the style for this. But this one here is just the original style, where it's the same as the factory would put in the car. where it's just got the long harness and the correct connector at the very end. So that's why I opted for this style, and it looks to be all correct. So let's go ahead and get this thing in here. So this here is what you're after, and it's got this nice little sheath on it, which I'm going to go ahead and steal and install on the new one as well. But you can see I've got my guide wire there. So I did drop the steering wheel down from its support because the support bracket is in the way of being able to pull this harness up through it. So it's easier to just take that bracket out of there instead of trying to fight this. So I'm going to go ahead, hook up the new one to my guide wire here, get this little protective covering installed on it, and pull it through and reassemble all this. I've got that new switch here all fully installed, but before I go and button the rest of this up, I want to go through a function test here. It's always a good idea to just make sure everything works before you button it all up, because otherwise you have to take it all back apart again. So I've got the ignition key on here. Let's test out the driver's side. Got a nice consistent blink there. Let's see what we have outside the car. You can see our rear. Let's go check the front. Very good. Let's go ahead and flip that now to the passenger side. You can see the passenger side tail lights flashing over there. And we've got the front as well. And they're all nice and consistent now as well, so that tells me that there's not an issue with the flash or anything like that. Let's go ahead and return this back to center here. Hit our hazards. You can see that they're flashing a little bit quicker. We've got both there in the rear flashing together. We come up front. We've got both up front flashing as well. So everything is now working in tandem. I don't have to sit here and try to jiggle the switch to get things to work the way they should. So now let me go ahead and try to run the running lights and see what we get now. Okay, so it seems like the lights up front here are reversed. So I believe it should be flashing the brights. And right now the brights are on for the parking lights. I don't think you see the dim lights being lit up at all because the brights are on. So I don't know if that's just the wrong bulbs or if the bulbs are installed backwards. They're kind of keyed in a way where they should only go in one direction, so that's a little bit odd. But yeah, those certainly seem to be wired in reverse. That's why we're not getting any flashing up front here with our hazards on. And the rear here definitely seems to be working the way it should. If I go ahead and cancel my flasher, I just barely make out my dim running lights reflecting off the garage door in the back. And as we see, my front parking lights are staying on the bright setting. So yeah, that's interesting here. I'm not sure if these are just the wrong bulbs or if I've got them installed backwards, but kind of the backwards operation of what I would expect. So might go ahead and play with those bulbs a little bit, see if I can get those dialed in. But everything seems to be working as far as the switch goes, so I can go ahead and clean up my mess in here. As you can see, I've made quite a big one. Get this steering wheel reassembled. I got a bit ahead of myself there. There's one last check to do here. We need to see if this horn works. So I should be able to just take the good old screwdriver here, jump it between the shaft and that little brass button and see if our horn works. Let's see what we get. Well, that's kind of comical. I'm not even sure what to describe that sound as. It's kind of a horn. A bit sickly sounding, but it sort of works. So if I get that additional hardware there for the horn button, we should at least have a working horn. So I'm going to go ahead and finish getting this all assembled here. So we're back to some redneck shenanigans here. So I have the proper tool that's meant for actually pulling those rings and reinstalling them. But as you can see, it's kind of been cut off at some point. I must have forgot what it was for and just ended up repurposing it for something else. So I've just got kind of two long bolts in here acting as the legs here to push on the plate. And that'll let me slide this ring down into place. And then I'll be able to take this back off and that should be all locked in place here. So yeah, sometimes you have to get creative when you thought you were being creative, repurposing your tools for something else. So here we have the finished product. Everything is back together again, looking exactly as crusty as when I first started. You can't even tell I did anything, except when I hit our indicator now, we get nice, even, consistent flashes. It works without jiggling the stick. The right indicator, it's no longer flashing. It stopped before I took things apart, so I think there just might be a short or a burnt out bulb. Not too concerned with that because the gauge cluster should be here tomorrow, which means I get to rip the dash apart all over again, drop the steering column, basically go back and redo a bunch of the stuff I did today. So we'll address that then tomorrow. We'll put in a new light switch as well, and that should really dial back the remaining electrical gremlins on the car here. And once we get the radio wired in, which we'll probably do at the same time tomorrow, the last of the gremlins is really just going to be the air conditioning wiring, primarily just the fan or blower motor control here. Some of the connectors there were a little bit melted, so that's really the last of the things to have to fix in terms of electrical issues here. Everything else should be either new or taken care of at that point in time, so cross our fingers that nothing new develops after that. But that's going to do it here for today. We'll pick up tomorrow when that cluster arrives. We are back and we have a whole lot of work to do. As you can see, our gauge cluster has arrived. I picked this up from High Tech Classics out of California. That's why it took a little bit of time to get to me. I do highly recommend them if you're in the market for any kind of gauge conversion for your Chevelle. They were really great to work with. They answered a bunch of my questions. And one of the nice things about it is that you can order all of the wiring pretty much pre-set up for your particular conversion. So in this particular case, we're going from the warning system to the analog gauges, but we're also going with a voltmeter over here instead of an ammeter. So this harness here is specifically set up for running the voltmeter and not the ammeter, and has the tack lead in it as well. If you're running the factory style ammeter, they'd have the wiring in here for the ammeter setup. So it makes things really nice and easy. Comes with very clear directions and instructions if you didn't know what you were doing. It just makes it extremely simple to walk through and do all of this. On that note, I'm going to modify this ever so slightly because I don't like the way it's done. But that's a little bit of a different story here. So just going over the gauges a little bit. As you can see, I've got the voltmeter, obviously. For the tack, I picked up the 6,500 RPM instead of the 5,500 RPM. Yes, I know it's the wrong one for this engine. However, remember I'm putting an L78 in this car, and that would be the correct tack for the L78. So that is the reasoning I had for doing it that way. For our gauge, or I'm sorry, our speedometer here, went with the column shift style. It's got the cable with it here for your shift indicator. So it'd be nice to have that back. The one on the car currently is broken. The lens itself is not melted, so that's always nice. Our clock should actually work. Not that we'll actually probably use it. It's always nice to be able to tell what temp you're running. And then our fuel gauge is much, much, much smaller than it was originally. So to show you what I mean about how I'm going to change up the wiring here just a little bit. So if we look at this harness, you can see there's this jumper wire here for the pink wire. And this is what provides power to the voltmeter. So typically, this would be your ammeter over here on this side. You can see there's only really one lead connected right now. And that's because that's all the voltmeter needs when it's mounted in this place. The PCB is the same for either setup. So really you only need this one source here, and then it just gets the ground through the actual body of the housing here. So to do that, they just jumper the 12 volt kind of ignition signal that comes in off this pink wire, and then they just feed it here to pin 3 on the plug and connector itself. But that requires you to splice it into the existing harness and basically cut off the current pin and then just splice it in. And I'm not a big fan of cutting up the factory wiring if I can avoid it. So my plan is to essentially de-pin this pink setup here, and instead of running it in the actual connector here, I plugged the connector in just temporarily into the socket. And you can see where that pink wire ends up. It ends up right here at the front of the connector. So we can follow this trace here where the pin is for that. If we follow it over, we can see that it comes to this post right here. And we can also confirm that with our meter and just check continuity. So we got 12 volts right here at this post. So rather than jumpering it in the connector like this and having to cut up the factory wiring, I'm going to make a jumper wire to go from this post here over to this post, and it'll basically accomplish the same thing that's happening here, except I won't have to modify or muck up any of my existing factory wiring. I can just basically de-pin everything and just plug it straight into the nice new socket here, not have to cut anything up. It'll all be nice and reversible if need be. So that's why I'm going to change things up ever so slightly from what they give me here. And then on the end of this thing, it's set up for a factory car. It's just got a little ring terminal here at the end for connecting to the coil. I'll have to change that out for the spade connector and the connector for the HEI signal, since that's what we've got in the car. But I've got all of that as well. So I've got the new light switch here that'll take care of some of our remaining electrical gremlins there as well. So we'll get that installed at the same time. But yeah, should be pretty smooth, pretty painless for the most part. I'm not going to pull the entire dash out this time. I'm just going to try to take the cluster out with the actual like dash plastic in place. It is doable. I've done it before. It's a little bit of work. Just be really careful when you're getting back through there, but it's not too terrible to do. So we're going to try to do it that way. So I'm going to go ahead, start getting the dash in here all stripped apart. Got to get the dash cover back out, and then we'll start diving into this thing. Got the old cluster pulled out and it was in pretty poor condition. Over here on the lights and the generator side, this whole section is cracked, and as you can see, it just moves a bunch. It's just a matter of time until it just snapped off completely. I was always really weary about pulling the light switch out, which had shorts and other issues in it of its own. On the back here, you can see that the PCB was in really poor condition, especially up here where the connector went. All these traces are actually loose behind the top little laminate, and they're all running into each other, shorting out, so explains why barely anything up here worked correctly. So it's gonna be nice to just replace this. The little speedometer clip there was all mangled up, didn't really hold it in there very well. So I do need to rob some stuff from this. I need the lever for our light switch. And the way you steal that out of here is you gotta push this little spring-loaded button right here in while you pull the lever out, and that'll let the lever slide out. And then I need to take the mounting screw that is screwed in right behind all this so that I can mount the new one up to the new gauge cluster. So I'm going to go ahead, take care of that. Then I'm going to start working on pinning in the new connector under here and lining up all the pins with what we need for our nice new analog gauge cluster based off the instructions I've got. Again, I won't need to modify anything since I took that little jumper out of there and I just jumped it on the back of the new cluster, so it should be pretty straightforward. I've just got this nice tiny little flathead here, which is really good for this. You just slide it down behind the top of the pin there, all the way down. It releases the little catch on the back of it, and they just pull right out of the bottom, nice and easy. So it should be pretty simple to do. Get that new connector repinned up, and we'll be ready to reinstall. So next up, we want to come inside the car, find our original cluster plug here, and start depinning all these terminals. We're going to move them into our nice pliable replacement connector here that we've got. Essentially everything is going to be removed and moved over except for the brown wire in here, which is what was originally for the alternator warning light. We won't be reusing that since we have a volt gauge, which will basically stand in its place now. So I'm just going to go ahead and depin everything from here, and then we'll start migrating them into here. So now that I've got this dash all ripped apart, it gives me great accessibility to be able to deal with all this radio wiring. So I pulled out the old factory harness here, and it's in pretty poor condition. It's got some wires here that are just all beat up and they're really brittle. So if I ever put the 8-track back in there, I'm just going to end up replacing this harness entirely. They do make it, so I'm not too concerned with just throwing this thing away. So what I did was I cut the connector off that goes to the front harness here and just repurposed it for the new harness for the new radio. It's got 3 wires. This gray one here goes to the interior lights. We're not going to be reusing that one. It's got black there for ground. Then this yellow one here was originally the power source to the radio, but it operates through the ignition switch. So essentially you only have power here when the key is in the on position or when the key is in the accessory position. I'm not sure if the Chevelle even has an accessory like radio position on it or not. But the new radio needs a constant battery feed as well for things like memory presets, remembering what's last station you were on, the time, that sort of stuff. So I set this up and created this orange wire here and styled it after the way that they usually would connect in factory accessories. So it's got the correct connector here to be able to plug into the battery slot on the fuse box. Then it's got a little daisy chain portion here where you can connect in another one if need be. Then it just runs into the actual replacement harness here with butt connectors, so I can repurpose it in the future if ever need be. I didn't put a fuse on this because the radio itself is fused, so we should be fine there. So this should be enough right now to be able to plug all this in, route it correctly, and just kind of get it out of the way, make sure it's not draping anywhere. And we should be able to power up and actually test the radio, just to make sure that it turns on. There's a separate harness and everything else for the speakers, which I'll run later. One other thing I want to do while I'm in here is try to get the actual radio there mounted better than it is. Right now it's only bolted in through the front where the dials come through, so it's just basically being supported by the plastic. I really don't want to leave it that way. They come with like a little like plumber's strap that you can attach to the back and then try to like hang it off of something to support it. I don't really see a great place to connect it to at the moment. I'll have to try to figure something out for that because I really don't want to put any stress on this dash. That was one of the reasons I wanted to take the 8-track player out for now, because that thing weighs just a ton. And even though it's got brackets in the back for it, it still felt like it was just bowing the entire dash out in the center with how much it weighed. This new radio is vastly lighter. So we'll go ahead and try to take care of that. I have the pins all moved over to the new connector now for the actual gauge cluster here. So we should be all set to go ahead and install this bad boy. We'll have to make sure we get our grounds connected here, get our little ground strap there screwed into the support of the dash itself. We want to definitely make sure we get our little shift indicator cable here connected up correctly, that it doesn't just get lost and I forget about it. So yeah, quite a bit still left to do, but we're making progress. A lot of things I hopefully won't forget. I've got the new radio harness installed and plugged in at the fuse box, so everything should be all set to be able to power this thing on. Let's see what we get. Yep, there we go. Alright, that seems to work. Let's go ahead and pick a station of some random sort here. It's got some kind of preset in there. Now we'll turn this back off. Wait a second, turn it back on. And if we have this set up correctly, it should return to the station where we left it. And that appears to be correct. So they call this the slide bar radio because it's got this little button here. You can just slide it over and then it hides the LCD screen. Makes it look like just a traditional seek bar, but not the most convincing thing in the world. But yeah, should serve our purposes. It's really lightweight, so it's not going to put a whole lot of stress on the dash here. Just need to clean up the wiring a little bit for that. Try to get that band here installed somewhere in the back. Get a little bit more support on this so it's not flopping around. Then we can move on to the fun part of getting that actual cluster reinstalled here, which is always an absolute joy. I've got the new gauge cluster here installed and everything is all wired up and should be all fully connected. And it looks absolutely amazing in here. It looks so much better without our clock being all melted up. You can actually see it ticking away now. Everything else in here looks really good. If we go ahead and turn the ignition on here, you can see we get our little dummy light for the oil pressure that's now relocated over here to the tach. You can see our volts there, jumped up to 12 right in the middle of the gauge, exactly where it should be. Over here for our temp and fuel, I discovered that my fuel sending unit is not connected. I need to get back under there and reconnect that. I thought I did that when I installed it, but I must have been fighting with one of the brackets and completely spaced on it. For the temp sender, it is connected, but it's connected to the switch currently. For the dummy lights, it's not connected to an actual like linear rate sending unit, so that's why that's just reading full at the moment. I do have the correct sending unit for that, so I'll get that installed tomorrow because I have to drain the coolant out for that. Let's see here, if we turn off the lights, we can see that the lights for this will work when I pull on my light switch here. Now they're not very bright. This is them turned up to the max, and I'm not sure if the camera is even going to pick it up. They're kind of dull, or dim rather. I'm not sure if that's just how they always were. It's a little bit better if it's completely dark, but yeah, still not very bright in here. A little bit surprised by that, but it is what it is for now. I can try to look and maybe see if there's any resistance in the fuse or corrosion down there. Do a little bit of cleanup on that. See if we can get those just a little bit brighter. But it is working correctly. That new switch functions beautifully compared to what was in here before. My headlights and everything else do work. One thing I noticed is that the turn signal indicator, the lens behind here that's colored green, isn't very thick, and like when it lights up it's kind of a yellowish, and I can see all the way through it, and I can actually see the bulb directly through here. Now normally this should be like green and just have a nice thick lens behind there that you can't see through. And I actually looked at the front of it and it does have the green lens, but it must just be really thin. So that's kind of interesting about these reman versions versus the factory ones. You can see we do have now our right turn signal indicators working correctly as it should. So yeah, everything seems to be working beautifully. We no longer have any kind of electrical gremlins here to really deal with. Just a few things we need to connect, and then yeah, we should be all buttoned up. Really the last thing we'll have to deal with in terms of electrical is for the air conditioning here, which I'm not really concerned about because it's not connected. Even the heater's not connected, so not a huge concern. And for that, we just need to come through here and replace a couple of these connectors that got melted up and are pretty beat up. Other than that, the wiring seems to be pretty much okay for all that AC side stuff. So while I'm still in here, next I want to try to get some speakers mounted. I picked up these little guys here. They're just kind of like generic factory replacements. They're 4x6, and I've got them mounted in the factory brackets. Now I'm using these little L brackets, and those I swiped from the actual original factory speakers that came in here. They were riveted to the original speakers. I just drilled the rivet out, then I just jammed a little self-tapping screw in there to use those L brackets on both sides. Hopefully this will fit in here, since from what I hear and what I see over here, it's kind of tight clearance here for the magnet so it doesn't hit the wiring harness or the actual cluster itself. So hopefully this will fit in here correctly, and I'll go ahead and put the one in on the passenger side, and we'll basically just run the front speakers for now. At some other point I'll wire it in where it actually connects into the harness that runs to the back for the rear speakers. But there's so much rust and other stuff I got to repair back there, it's not a huge deal at this point in time. So yeah, very pleased with the way this has all turned out. Just a little bit more work to go here. Get that tack hooked up and we'll go for a drive tomorrow. Make sure the tack is working. We might have to put a filter on it with the HEI, so we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it works just out of the box here. I'd really like to see what kind of RPM we're running at the speed. It's nice to have a speedometer in here that should work correctly. I got that all connected up as well. So yeah, really excited for tomorrow. Gonna go ahead and work on these speakers, and if I get everything working for that, we'll maybe bump some tunes here, see what that sounds like, and then we'll call it a night. I've got those new speakers mounted up in the factory brackets. I did have to modify the driver's side one just a little bit. I went ahead and reinstalled the dash pad here just to see if everything fits before I go and button it up for the final time. But yeah, overall, pretty happy. Not too much difficulty getting those mounted up in here. Everything kind of just ended up working out really well. It was really easy to wire in. So I just need to put the new vents in here, get that buttoned up, finalize this top pad here, get that all screwed in place again, and then we should be done in terms of electrical work here in the interior for now. All right, we are fired up. Our tack seems to be working just fine with the HEI. Getting good volts over here from the alternator. We should be ready for another test run. Speedometer does seem like it's doing things, so we'll be able to know how fast we're going, hopefully. Might be off a little bit, but it's better than nothing. So hopefully this goes a lot better than the last one did. pick up a new trunk at this point in time. I really like the patina of this one, but man, that one back there is so frustrating, just the noise it makes. The car seems to be running pretty well otherwise, other than all the bangs. It's got a bit of smoke if you really stomp on it as you pull away. Definitely starts to smoke once the secondary's open. Speedometer seems to be working beautifully here. No jumping issues, nothing like that. Tack seems to be working nice and good. It seems like it's got a filter or something built in it already. It's definitely not as jumpy as some of the old tacks used to be that I remember in cars like this. Start doing these test drives not at 5 p.m. every day. Great if I break down, a lot of people to help me, but not so great for avoiding the traffic. Turn signal indicators all seem to be working correctly. Still bothers me a little bit that it like flashes almost a yellow color here, and I can see the bulb. May just have to pull that apart one of these days if I'm ever back in there again and put the green, thicker lens from the other one. Not sure what that was all about. Don't know if they were yelling at me or the bike behind me. Definitely still got a bit of a whirring and kind of brake grinding noise going on here, so I think I'm still rubbing that caliper bracket on the rims. I'm gonna have to get in there and check on that a bit more, see if I make that better. First things first, we're gonna pick up some coffee. Alright, coffee has been acquired. Let's hit the road. So while I was in there, I was doing just a little bit of math here, and it seems to think that we have about a 355 rear end in this, but we'll have to see if that plays out a little bit more and matches up with a couple of other speeds here. And of course, it also assumes that my speedometer is accurate. Got a pretty significant grind noise. I can't tell if that's from that wheel again or if that's coming from the back this time. Might need to double check those rear wheel bearings. I had done that a while ago, but it's been a bit, so probably not worth doing again. Or probably worth doing again, I mean. Oh yeah, it sounds like it's coming from the front again. On those, they're the right stuff. Brake caliper plus as well. I'm gonna go ahead and do a little bit of math here on this, see about what kind of gear ratio it thinks we had for doing 60 here. But yeah, we'll need to get the GPS out and just confirm that the speedometer is correct. But it's definitely nice that it seems to work. So I ran the numbers here through the old calculator, and I'm still a little bit undecided. I really just need a more accurate way of measuring my speed. I really should run my GPS with the phone here, because with that new speedometer, it's hard to say if that's accurate or not. And with 331s, 355s, they're so kind of close to each other that if your speedometer's off ever so slightly, it really could be either one. There's a good chance that it's just a factory 331 back there. Either way, it really wasn't doing terrible RPM there, cruising around 60-ish miles per hour, so it'll work fine for what we need. Other than that, it's running really well. It's nice having functioning gauges in there and just knowing that all of our indicators work. It's nice having all these just electrical gremlins all taken care of. So that's going to do it here for the old Chevelle. We've got some big plans for this thing before the end of the year. There are 2 remaining open test and tune events at the local drag strip. That's right, I want to get this thing to pass tech and send it down the strip and see what she will do. Now it's going to be quite a journey trying to get this thing to pass spec. I've been trying to find their actual guidelines just to see what I need to do, what I need to make sure is working on this thing and what's all dialed in, so that when we get there we don't run into any issues. So I don't think it's going to run anything faster than a 14. That makes it a little bit lax for us. That kind of gets us where there's not quite as stringent of rules. With the open rear end on here, these really skinny, just generic Advanta tires on the back, this thing is not going to hook up very well off the line. And as far as I know, these TH400s like this and these stock setups, they don't really like leaving the line just running off the converter, so we're not going to really load it up. We'll just basically feather her off the line. Be a little bit gentle, but I think it'll still be fun just sending this thing down the strip, as rusty and crusty as she is, just seeing what this little 396 has got left in her. So that's going to be our goal here for the next 2 weeks, to try to get it to pass tech inspection, make sure we've got everything taken care of, and then we're going to try to hit the track with it and see what it'll do. So definitely stay tuned. Once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I will catch you next time.